Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has rejected U.S. criticism of Beijing as lies. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Yi said countries have the right to protect their information security. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo defended Washington's global role while criticizing China and Russia's aggression. Speaking at the conference, Pompeo said Russia, Iran, China are destabilizing the rules-based international system. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper accused Beijing of a nefarious strategy through Huawei. He said Washington is working to develop alternatives to China's 5G vendors. Foreign ministers from world powers will discuss the implementation of the Libya ceasefire and the arms embargo in Munich Security Conference tomorrow. Earlier, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas welcomed the new momentum towards a lasting ceasefire in Libya. Maas said the UN Security Council decision has endorsed the outcome of the Berlin conference after long and difficult negotiations. He said last week the military committees of the conflict parties had their first direct negotiations on a ceasefire. The foreign minister said the meeting will discuss the monitoring mechanisms and implementation of the conclusions of the Berlin conference. Foreign ministers from the US, Russia, Turkey, Italy, France, and other regional actors are expected to take part in the meeting. In Iraq, 4 people are killed in 2 separate attacks in the eastern part of the country. Police say ISIS attacked a security checkpoint in the Diyala province's Bodiz area, killing 2 officers. Officials said a husband and his wife were also found dead inside their home in Bodiz. Authorities have launched an investigation into the incident. Since late 2017, the Iraqi army and the US-led military coalition retained most of the territories lost to the terrorist group. Despite largely eradicating ISIS presence, it has continued to conduct sporadic attacks in Iraq. The Indian government has charged the occupied Kashmir's politician Shah Faisal under the controversial Public Safety Act. Last week, Occupied Valley's former chief ministers Mehbooba Mufti and Omar Abdullah were also arrested under the stringent law. Under the law, the Indian government can keep a person in custody for up to 2 years without a trial. Faisal was detained in August last year after his remarks against Delhi's annexation of Jammu and Kashmir. Last year, Faisal formed the Jammu and Kashmir People's Movement Party after resigning from the Indian Administrative Service. The valley is reeling under India's lockdown for the last 195 days. Pakistan has summoned an Indian diplomat from the High Commission to register Islamabad's strong protest against border ceasefire violations. Yesterday, a 13-year-old girl was wounded in unprovoked Indian fighting in the Neza Pir and Rakchikri sectors along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said India's deliberate targeting of the civilian population is deplorable and against the humanitarian laws. It said India's ceasefire violations are a threat to regional peace and security and may lead to a strategic miscalculation. Pakistan has time and again asked India to respect the 2003 ceasefire agreement, but the ceasefire violations by Indian forces continue unabated. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will arrive in Pakistan on a 4-day maiden visit tomorrow. Guterres is scheduled to chair the international conference on 40 years of hosting Afghan refugees in Pakistan. In a statement, Pakistan's Foreign Office said Guterres will meet Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan. It said Islamabad will apprise Guterres on Pakistan's perspective on all aspects of Indian-occupied Kashmir's dispute. The office said the Secretary General will pay a visit to Lahore and also travel to Gurdwara Kartarpur Sahib. It said Guterres' participation in the conference is a recognition of Pakistan's exemplary resolve in hosting Afghan refugees for the past 4 decades. The United Nations says it is optimistic on the peace talks between the US and the Taliban, calling them a step toward ending the Afghan war. In a press briefing, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said the body is closely following the Doha talks. Dujarric said the organization's office in Kabul has been kept up to date. He said the ongoing talks are important for opening a way to the intra-Afghan peace talks. His statement comes a day before UN Chief Antonio Guterres' visit to Pakistan. During his stay, Guterres will chair a conference on Afghan refugees and meet Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and other top leadership. The United Nations has called on Syria, Turkey and Russia to take steps towards de-escalation of the situation in Idlib. UN General Secretary spokesperson Stefan Dujarric says a ceasefire is necessary to ensure humanitarian access to the region. Dujarric said the UN wants the conflicting parties in Syria to end violence and fighting. The statement comes after Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused the Russian and Syrian forces of targeting civilians in Idlib. He said Ankara will not tolerate any further violations of the truce in Syria. Tensions are high in the region after clashes between Turkish and the Russian-backed Syrian forces in Idlib. In its latest report on the Syrian refugees, the UN head of humanitarian affairs says 20,000 people have fled Idlib in the last 2 days. UN official Mark Lowcock says more people have fled the country in the last 10 weeks than at any other time in the 9-year conflict. Watch more in this report.
As they move, people check the sky and wonder if they're about to be bombed. In the bone-crushing cold, Syrian refugees travel in open trucks or on foot, day and night. They're heading to the Turkish border.
We fled 5 days ago from the western province of Anjara near Aleppo. We escaped the airstrikes and shelling. The journey was very difficult. It was cold, we couldn't find a car, and we kept walking until we found a car to take us here.
Most camps are full. Many sleep in the open, in fields where they struggle to keep warm in the harsh winter conditions.
We didn't have any money. We kept looking around but couldn't find a car. And we were surrounded by airstrikes. We are now here in a camp near Afrin, staying in a tent just to get by. The past 3 days have been cold on the road and on the streets.
In Syria's official population of 17 million, 5.5 million people are living as refugees in neighbouring countries. 6 million others have been uprooted within their country. More than 800,000 Syrians have fled since December 1st, and the exodus is expected to continue.
In Yemen, the Houthi rebel group claims it shot down a tornado fighter jet belonging to the government coalition. In a statement, a Houthi spokesperson said the group targeted the jet with an advanced air-to-ground missile in the Al Jawf governorate. A spokesperson for the coalition forces has confirmed the incident. Yemen has been entangled in violence and chaos since 2014 after Houthi rebels overran much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. The UN says tens of thousands of Yemenis have been killed since then, while another 14 million are at risk of starvation. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In China, 143 people have died in the last 24 hours from the new coronavirus, which brings the toll to 1,523. The National Health Commission says 2,641 more people are now known to be infected. That brings the total to over 66,000 across the country. What in this report?
With no sign of the outbreak ending, people are dying in hundreds every day, and it's spreading. Egypt has confirmed a coronavirus case, the first in Africa. In China, to contain the virus, Beijing has instructed people entering the city to go into quarantine for 14 days or risk punishment. Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China will do everything it can to end the outbreak.
每个人都承担了责任。
In this country with 1.4 billion Chinese people, we are doing everything we can, leaving no stone unturned to contain this epidemic. This would be a great challenge to any country, to any leader worldwide. But China has done it. We cannot rule out the possibility that there are some challenges to China. However, we must see that the majority of countries have expressed the appreciation of what China has been doing.
在共同参与的。
The World Health Organization says it will open an investigation into the coronavirus outbreak in China this weekend. The main focus will be how COVID-19, as it's called, is spreading and the severity of the disease.
I'm glad to say that the WHO-led joint mission with China on COVID-19 is moving forward. We expect the full team to touch down over the weekend. The mission consists of 12 international and WHO experts and a similar number of national expert counterparts from China.
The global health body is advising Japan not to go ahead with this year's Olympic Games in Tokyo. Japan is one of the most affected countries outside of China.
France has confirmed the first death from the new coronavirus in the country, becoming the maiden fatality in Europe as well as outside Asia. French Health Minister Agnès Buzyn says an 80-year-old Chinese tourist died after being hospitalized. Last month, France became the first European country to confirm the cases of the virus. It has 11 confirmed cases of the disease. Previously, 3 deaths had been reported in Hong Kong, the Philippines and Japan. And the deadly virus has now killed a total of 1,524 people. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has threatened to arrest US-backed opposition leader Juan Guaido. Speaking to the international press in Caracas, Maduro said that the day will come when Guaido will pay for his crimes. Maduro accused Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro of being behind terrorist threats. He criticized Spain for what he called a smear campaign against Venezuela. Earlier this week, officials allowed Guaido back into the country from a tour of the US and Europe despite a travel ban. Maduro said Venezuela's justice system will decide when Guaido should be imprisoned.
The day the courts of the Republic give the order to detain Mr. Juan Guaido for all the crimes he has committed, that day he will go to jail. That is a certainty. That day has not arrived, but it will.
40 people, including soldiers, have been killed in a spate of attacks in central Mali. Government officials said 31 civilians have died in inter-ethnic violence in the village of Ouagassogou. Authorities say 30 heavily armed men entered Ouagassogou, burning houses and looting livestock. They said the attackers arrived only hours after government troops left the area. Elsewhere in the country, an ambush killed 9 soldiers in the village of Benchia in Gao. The army said 4 others were injured without saying who carried out the attack. Central Mali has been gripped by ethnic violence since the militant revolt and brief takeover in 2012. Dubai has become home to the world's largest 3D printed building ever constructed. The structure took only 3 workers and a printer to build. More in this report.
Dubai is known as a city of opulence that constantly tries to outdo other tourist destinations. After Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, the city has now become the site of a new architectural feat, the largest 3D printed building in the world, with walls 31 feet high and 2 stories spanning 6,900 square feet.
We in Dubai Municipality have started researching on 3D printing. We have done a very long research, came up with a beautiful building with a 2-story. It has been registered by the Guinness Records book as the first.
US company Apis Core built the structure using only one 3D printer, which was moved around the site by a crane. Using 3D printing instead of traditional labor, the production cost of the project was reduced from over $680,000 to around $270,000.
The city has changed quite a lot over the last 5-10 years, and there's a lot more requirement for affordable units. So if you're able to have an industry which is able to produce units at a cheaper rate because the costs are lower, because there's such a significantly lower requirement for labor within those, that means the end product is likely to be a lot cheaper as well.
The government says the building is a move towards sustainability, using local materials and efficient installation to reduce energy consumption.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. The US has announced an increase in tariffs on Airbus planes imported from Europe to 15% beginning from March 18th. The United States Trade Representative's announcement comes days after President Donald Trump said a trade deal with the European Union will be re-evaluated. The duties have been at 10% since last October, when Washington hit $7.5 billion in European products with tariffs. Airbus says Washington's decision will hit US airlines, which are already facing difficulties. The European plane maker said it will continue discussions with its US customers to ease the effects of tariffs as far as possible. Industry executives in Europe and the US are waiting on new announcements from trade authorities amid rising economic tensions. Another weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.